the EPCs that were sitting. We had scheduled to start at 12 o'clock, unbeknown to us that some of the EPCs were going to go beyond the determined end time. But we really appreciate your presence and your patience in this regard. We're going to start shortly, but before we do so, I would like to do two things. One, to introduce the parliamentary management who have joined us at this interaction. And after that, I'll just very briefly, in 1-2 lines, just give a broad characterization of our interaction this afternoon. We've got the Secretary to Parliament seated next to me. He is Mr. Gengezi Mkidlana. You pretty much know him now. And accompanying us is the whole range of Parliament's managers, and I'm just going to introduce them in no particular order. We've got Mr. Herbersberger seated on the left-hand side. He's the he's the head of strategy at Parliament. We've got Advocate Zureya Adikari, who is the head of legal services at Parliament. Seated next to her on the front row is Mr. Lizo Makele, who is the human resource executive. In the back row is Mr. Ravi Polia, who is the acting head of ICT at Parliament. And next to her is Ms. Linda Harper, who is responsible for members' interests. Going along is Mr. Sizwe Nyenyiso. Sizwe Nyenyiso is the internal auditor at Parliament. And next to Sizwe is the Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Manenje Manenje. And next to Mr. Manenje is Professor Mohammed Jahed, who is the Director for the Parliamentary Budget Office. And Advocate Kaya Zweni. Advocate Kaya Zweni is the head of OISD, offices responsible for institutions supporting democracy. And then next to Advocate Zweni is Ms. Resida Beck. Ms. Resida Beck is the Divisional Manager responsible for public participation and public education. And next to her is the Acting Divisional Manager for International Relations, Ms. Nomfundo Sonjika. Thank you very much, colleagues. The conceptualization by the management team of this was for it to be an interaction. In other words, an open engagement with yourselves, pretty much along the lines of mutual empowerment. Because obviously most of you are based at Parliament as members of the Parliamentary Gallery Association with the interest of understanding the institution that you cover for the benefit of the people who rely on you for the information about their institution. That can only happen when there is an open interaction between ourselves about all sorts of issues of interest to yourselves, issues of interest in particular to the people that you represent here, the readers and the listeners, of the consumers of the information that you produce. So this is the slight difference between today's interaction and what we normally would have in these circumstances, which would really be about a briefing to yourselves. And we'd like to sustain this. We'd like to have this, like I said, for the purposes of mutual empowerment. I'm not going to waste too much time in that regard. We'll allow the Secretary just to give us broad overviews on those kind of issues of strategy, but also we know that there's been quite a number of issues that some of you have been covering, and some of the things that have been permeating the public space relating to labor relations within the institution of Parliament. So I'm sure the Secretary will have time also to reflect on those issues, and we will, as usual, afford you the opportunity to engage, and in instances where possible, the matters that you may be interested in will be handled by the collective that hosts you at this interaction this afternoon. Thank you very much. Without any further ado, I would invite the Secretary to Parliament, Mr. Gengezi Mkidlana, to talk to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs, and good morning to members of the media and colleagues. I think essentially today, from our perspective, we are beginning a process of engaging with you on our future direction as you know, the fifth Parliament, and as the administration that is entrusted with the responsibility of supporting the chairperson of the NCOP and the Speaker of the National Assembly. and the members indeed who constitute Parliament. In doing so, it is important to note that Parliament is a democratic institution, a public institution that is open, transparent, and works within those confines. In doing that, like any other state organ and institution, we are guided by the laws and the principles of management, which dictates that from the strategic direction that we get from the executive authority, we then prepare a strategic plan that guides the work that we have to do. And in this regard, we're talking about the Fifth Parliament. And noting that the Fifth Parliament, of course, is a continuation from the various parliaments that we have had, you know, from the first to the fourth Parliament. And in doing that, Parliament has developed and grown in various ways. But like as it is said, that each particular parliament has its own character. You know, no parliament is the same as the other. The characteristics of the first parliament were most certainly different from those of the second, and so forth. And so is the fifth parliament. It has its own unique characteristics. It's operating within a particular perspective. Whereas a country, we are all focused on the implementation of the National Development Plan as our vision for the country. So our interaction really today, and the reason why the colleagues are also here, is to basically say to yourselves that we are open for engagement and for sharing in this regard. And we are open for articulation of the work that we have done, and we hope, as Mr. Jacobs has indicated, we can have these sessions with yourselves from time to time so that we can take you into confidence as people who have particular responsibility to inform and report to the public on the work that we do. And in doing that, it would help us greatly if we then, from our side, provide you with the necessary information and provide you with the necessary perspectives of what we do, how we do it, and what is the impact of what we do, and what challenges are we experiencing. To look into then the issues around our collective bargaining framework, we need to understand those within the context of where we are as Parliament. As you would know, organizations grow, and there are various stages of growing for organizations, right? You get to a young organization that exhibits particular characteristics, to an organization that gets into, if you like, your teenage youth that exhibits particular characteristics, and the one that is your young adult, and the one that has matured. And in our instance, as we always say, all of us, that South Africa is still a very young democracy if we have to compare ourselves with the established democracies. And so are our institutions. And in this instance, we think we are still, you know, at a level where we are growing and finding each other in this regard and trying to master what we do. And so is our relationship in the labor relations perspective. You would know that the labor relations between ourselves and the recognized union, which is now in this regard, is governed by the collective bargaining agreement, as indicated, which clearly stipulates our areas of engagement. The bargaining chamber is classified as A to C. The processes and approaches of engagement, and what should happen in the event that you have a dispute, which normally would arise in such instance. As management, our relationship really is structured in a sense that we appoint, I as the secretary would appoint a team of managers who would form, if you like, the engagement team that works with the union. And that would then constitute your collective bargaining structure. That structure, of course, constitutes of managers, in fact, is led and guided by a manager in the HR space to lead around the areas of engagement within. They do so based on the discussions that we would have in the management meetings, which we hold them on a monthly basis, and on engagements that they would have with the accounting officer in this regard. And the accounting officer obtains his mandate from the executive authority, who then has policy making functions in that regard. Such that it's very important to note and indicate that what management does, it's not coming from a particular grouping or a particular person. It's a mandate-driven process, like any other collective bargaining structure. And in this instance, that engagement between the executive authority and the accounting officer around provision of mandates and reporting thereto occurs on a regular basis, and that then informs what HR and those that are representing management in the collective bargaining chamber do. They would work on the basis of that framework. And of course, if there's a need to move backwards and forwards to change the mandate, it would go through the same route so that there are specific issues that are dealt with. Now, we all know that in the course of 2015, there was a dispute that arose on the basis of the substantive agreement that was reached, and that dispute really was about the interpretation on the clause that dealt with performance bonuses. We also know in its common cause that that process led to an agreement that we reached in December, that is to be precise, on the 4th of December 2015. And that agreement outlined a number of issues, which I will say them very quickly. Firstly, it was on the issue of the percentages or the calculation of the bonuses. Secondly, the implementation of the no work, no pay for employees who were on the illegal strike. Maintenance of discipline by management, basically maintaining that right to discipline. On misconduct that was committed during the strike, and basically agreeing to an external facilitation on a number of policy issues around performance management, a facilitated process actually around a number of policy issues on the performance management system. It's important to note that whilst we were implementing that agreement that was reached on the 4th of December, there was a dispute that was lodged in the CCMA where Parliament had to appear on the basis of the complaint that was raised by the union. And that particular issue was not successful at the time in December. There was a second dispute that was lodged in January 2016, which related once again to an alleged violation of the December agreement, and it was lodged with the CCMA. That particular allegation was also not successful in January. We also, out of the outcome of that, we committed as management to say we're going to engage with the union on the basis of a whole series of issues that they had raised, which we said we were going to have a look at them. And the essence thereof was about the application of the policy of performance management. Namely, that the policy of performance management, as it was alleged, that management should not have the right to engage in the validation and the moderation of scores, which would have meant basically that you have to suspend certain aspects of the policy, the same policy that gives rise to the claim on any benefit whatsoever, if it so arises. On our side, on checking on the issues around policy and practice, is of course you can't have a selective application of policy. And in applying policy, you cannot indicate to management that don't perform your duties, don't validate, don't moderate where you need to. And validation and moderation in this regard, as you would know, it has three options. One, it can keep whatever scores the way they are, based on evidence. Secondly, it can lead to a reduction in the score. Thirdly, it can also lead to an increase in the score if, of course, the process of that validation indicates that the person actually deserves far much more than what they have been recognized for. And the contention was that that particular approach of the policy should not be implemented, which of course, as a responsible management, we could not accede to that, because it would mean that you would have a violation of the policy that upholds that process of performance management. The process, of course, could not reach a conclusion. It then had to engage, once again, the intervention of the principals in this regard, meaning in particular the executive authorities and the leadership of Nehawu at the national level, which led to a conclusion that first and foremost we are going to look into the full implementation of the December agreement, meaning we are not looking at varying or changing the agreement. All we are looking at is the modalities of implementation and how best to do that, what to do first, what to do last, and so forth, but not necessarily varying that agreement. And in other words, the agreement is not being reopened. Whilst parties were busy on the facilitated process of the CCMA, it could not produce the desired results. It's important to note that at this stage, we had given on our side as management to say to our colleagues in the union that raise whatever issue that you want to put forward. And in this case, they raised matters, even some of them were outside necessarily of the scope of the agreement, which had to be discussed and debated. But over and above that, there were other issues that were related to, that were outside of the scope that was indicated in the agreement. And those issues related, for instance, to reducing the number of days that would be applicable on the no work, no pay, which of course, that is outside of the mandate that we were given them. The second bit was on basically saying that staff who are at the D level, which they are management staff, must be negotiated for by the union. And of course, we can all see the contradiction in that. That you cannot have a management level being negotiated for by the union, because management has a particular role, and then you have the bargaining chamber, who also have a particular responsibility, and they have their own rights in terms of the constitution. Of course, that one we could also not accede to, because once again, over and above the point that I've made, the recognition agreement, as I had indicated, states very clearly that the bargaining chamber is from A to C, and it excludes D. So if you want to have an engagement on inclusion of D. In effect, what it means is that you want to reopen the initial recognition agreement that was signed between the union and management. And when you do that, you must follow a particular process, which would lead to engagement between both parties, where both parties can put issues that they want to deal with, and then agree on a new recognition agreement, as it were. And this was not the space for that. Our mandate that we were given was a very clear one, to say, look into the implementation of the December 15 agreement. Nothing more, nothing less, as it were. Now, the current scenario, as it were, the current situation, as it were, as we have seen in some of the reports that were published in some of the media houses, is first and foremost that the issue now that is noted, which we have noted and read there, is that management reneged from a 10% that it promised to the union, which you would recall, colleagues and members of the media, that last year we provided the media and staff copies of the agreement. The agreement doesn't have a 10% there whatsoever. What it says, we are going to agree on you are going to implement an increase on the basis of CPIX plus 3 using the Stats SA calculation of what do you call it, of the inflation at the time, right? And when you use that, you also basically, of your CPI projections, you do so on the basis of aggregation of annual data that you have, that is past data and future forecast. And in doing so, we prepared our documentation accordingly. And as indicated to you, it was submitted to myself and also submitted to the executive authority, who are the final decision makers as policy making authority in the institution. And it was authorized and a proposal put forward to the union, which they duly accepted. And they accepted it in writing. Copies of the letters that we have from ourselves that indicates very clearly that that proposal was made, they took it to their own meeting, and their meeting gave them a mandate to accept it, and they wrote it as such. And that particular letter is available to yourselves for inspection, so that you can then satisfy yourself in this regard to say, this is not only what management says. So to have basically a statement that says management reneged on the issue of your salary increases, your inflation increases, is actually devoid of truth. It's misleading to staff and the general membership, I think, of the union in this regard. It's misleading to the members who are part and parcel of this community. It's misleading to the public, because they themselves have written to us clearly indicating that they accept basically what we had put forward, which was well researched, well analyzed, using the data of an institution that we all know. So we didn't basically come up with that data of where is the CPIX and the CPI and so forth. It's data that we got from Stats SA, and using the formula that is best practice outside, because you don't use calculation on a monthly basis, you use calculation on an annual basis, because you are dealing with an annual increase. We also wish to indicate and reiterate that At this point, the union had withdrawn its participation from the collective bargaining structures. The collective bargaining structures are structures that are articulated in terms of the recognition agreement that allows for union and management to engage. From our side, at this stage, we have not withdrawn from any process. We are ready and willing to engage on matters, of course, which are of mutual interest to both staff and the institution, so that we can focus on the task at hand, which is the task of serving members, and a task of making sure that we serve the South African public and assist members as much as possible in this regard. We have also observed a growing trend of attacking management, in particular attacking the secretary and attacking certain managers and certain staff that are identified not to be in agreement or support processes that are outlined, which I think from our side we would like to encourage our colleagues in the union in this regard to desist from that. I think all of us, when we joined Parliament, I think starting with myself, I went to an interview, went through processes, which all of us basically came through this particular organization voluntarily because of our serious commitment to Parliament and our serious commitment to the people of South Africa. And in doing so, we said we want to serve in the public service space. And on our side, we are committed to doing that. And doing that, we want to place it on record. It does not include, and it will not include, a situation where you will have management that says it's at war with a union or it's at war with staff. That is a serious antithesis. It's not in our frame of mind. It will not occur. It's not in the interest of this institution. None of us are appointed to do that. It's not part of any mandate that we are given. It's not part of our orientation. It doesn't inform us. Having said that, I think it's important to then say we take our management responsibilities very seriously. Members demand that no less, in fact, from us. The South African public demands no less. And indeed, they don't deserve, any lesser kind of standard in that regard. And we're there to provide that. Is it going to be easy to do that? Definitely not. But that is a challenge that faces all of us and faces South Africa. So in spite of the posture then that has been taken by the union, we are here to say we are not at war with the union. If they are fighting, they will be fighting with themselves. They will not be fighting with management. If they are fighting with the secretary, they will be fighting with themselves. They will not be fighting with the secretary. If they are fighting with staff, they will be fighting with themselves. They will not be fighting with staff. What we are employed here to do is not to fight, but to work. And that we are committed to do. 100%, no less. So in this regard, the various campaigns, that have been launched, basically to discredit Parliament, discredit the Secretary, discredit our processes, are not correct. And indeed, we are there to engage with yourself. To clarify those issues, to put forward perspective. And indeed, let's assume, because we're not perfect as human beings, there is a wrongdoing that's happening here, there, and so forth. I think we will be the first one to agree. But I think it's not correct to brand the administration of Parliament as corrupt, not thinking, without vision, not committed, and so forth. It's not correct when there's no fact, when there's no substantiating. That is not correct. So the unsubstantiated allegations, we really, on our part, are looking for a situation where we can engage, because the only way we can look at these things is perhaps that maybe we have not communicated as much as we should. Perhaps maybe we have not provided the information. Perhaps maybe we could have taken a lot more time engaging with people. We could take more time engaging with people. And there are many other possibilities. But those possibilities, I want to add, are natural in the course of management and leadership. Right? They are natural in the course. So we remain resolute, basically, to support the executive authority to implement their work in this regard on a wide range of issues in implementing our strategy and around making sure that there's labor peace. We are opposed to any form of intimidation, attempts to subvert processes, character assassination, or even basically, putting the entire name of the institution into disrepute. We don't think we should do that. We have learned a number of lessons, I think, out of this from our side. That we have, as Parliament, as administration, quite a significant number of staff who are committed to Parliament. And this, I must say, it does not quite matter whether they are union members or not. There are a lot of staff members in Parliament who are committed to Parliament. We also want to indicate that in doing our work, we will strive to basically make sure that the professionalism that is required in the service is inculcated, the culture change of engagement, of people being able to have the confidence to tabulate their issues, put them forward, for the environment to be receiving when people tabulate their issues and engage them genuinely, and perform in a professional standard that there is. Because the view perspective that says you have an administration and management that is not open to listen is totally wrong. I think it needs to be tested. I think we should not be in a space where perhaps statements are being made without necessarily being tested. It should be tested. And this is not only on my behalf, it's also, on the colleagues that are here and those that are not here, we're open to engagement on a whole range of issues to clarify matters. We also want to state that Parliament does look after its staff members. And having said so, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are saying we are next to perfect as an organization. But we just want to illustrate a number of issues, because we have done our own comparisons of looking at how Parliament caters for its staff compared to other institutions. We pay in the upper, in fact, above the upper quartile of the public service. Meaning, at any given range, if you were to look at the salaries of Parliament toe to toe with those of the public service, Parliament pays well. And then to say that Parliament does not look after its staff members is not correct. And in fact, it even borders it borders on the point of, not taking our people seriously. Because there are some who would argue that already we get paid far much more, right? So there are those discussions that are there. The second issue is that in terms of giving our increases, we have consistently given increases that are well above inflation over years. Prime +3, prime +2 in some instances. So it's not quite correct if you check once again between Parliament and the public sector to say Parliament does not look after its staff members. We have looked at a wide variety of benefits that are currently under review. For instance, we're looking at your group life, we're looking at your retirement dispensation, which are things that are aimed at improving the well-being of staff. So there's a whole variety of issues that we're looking at. So, we provide, your bursaries, staff training, medical aid, which are included in your total cost, as it were, to company. And all of these are not done for the sake of doing it, right? Parliament has done this because it said it wants to attract professional staff who are then going to deliver. It wants to attract staff who are going to help us to implement our strategy. And in this regard, our commitment, if you look at our strategy for the next 5 years, is to make sure that we try and assist members as the representatives of the people to improve their total output as the parliamentarians. And then in so doing, we can help to contribute to improving the lives of South Africans. So I think in this regard, members of the media and colleagues, we just had this information to share, and some of the documents, as it were, they are available to yourself through Mr. Jacobs here to inspect and then see whether the things that we're talking about are indeed true, so that we can then engage on these matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, colleagues. That was a very broad presentation on a very broad range of issues. We'll now afford you an opportunity to contribute, to comment, or if needs be, to ask questions. Because remember, the interaction is also to ensure that there's mutual empowerment and that we continue to interact even closer than we have been. So you might comment on that concept, on that principle. You can comment on the issues the Secretary raised about the 5th Parliament, or possibly comment about the labor issues that he also reflected upon or asked questions in relation to all of the above. Can I just, before you do that, acknowledge Dr. Leon Gabriel, who has joined us after the introductions completed. Dr. Leon Gabriel is the Division Manager responsible for Knowledge and Information Services. Thank you. The floor is open, colleagues, for questions, for contributions, for comment. Marianne?
Marianne Merton, Daily Maverick. I have a couple of questions. One of them is possibly a clarification in the sense of what you're mentioning regarding the salary increases. The agreement signed in June makes it very clear, as you have said yourself, CPI as set by Stats SA plus 3%. In March, Stats SA said CPI is 7%. The letter that was sent to the union, the salary increases apparently were meant to come into effect on the 1st of April. A letter was sent from the HR executive to the union on the 7th of April, illustrating not what Stats SA said as per the June agreement, but then, as you mentioned, gave a range of banks and the Bureau of Economics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then adding those up and dividing it came to 6.4. So I'm just trying to get clarity. The agreement in June says Stats SA +3. The salary increases were meant to come into effect on the 1st of April. The official Stats SA CPI figure closest to that implementation date was indeed 7%. Clarification-wise, suddenly you go all out and go to all sorts of other sources, add them up, divide them, etc., etc., etc. Then I'd also like to get clarification on what are the actual reasons for a total of 480 Nehawu members, including, I think, 150 in the D band, not having been paid their performance bonuses. I'd also like to have a comment on the following, and while I hear what you're saying, that according to your recollection of the bargaining agreement, it is for bands A to C, okay. But you cannot constitutionally, in the Bill of Rights, from your side, simply determine that junior managers are not allowed to be part of the union. That is directly violating their rights. And we've had many, many responses from members of parliament here who insist that they can work outside of parliament because that is their constitutional right. So in terms of union membership, while you as management may have a view that junior managers are not allowed to be union members, how do you justify denying a constitutional right? Is there perhaps a policy Parliament has that expressly says junior managers are not allowed to be union members? Also, last point, comment on why would you think that Parliament is a great employer for providing these things that you have listed? Salary increases, medical aid, bursaries, all of those things are subject to negotiation one. And if you take a step back, those are standard issues that are being offered in the private sector anyway. So it's not exactly something that you can say that is a special effort by Parliament. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, thank you, Secretary.
Thank you very much, Luzu and Marianne. The first issue is Stats SA releases statistics on a month-by-month basis, right? When you do a calculation on a salary increase for the year that is coming, you use, as I have indicated, an aggregation for the year that has passed and the year that is forecasted, because it tells you exactly, right, where you are. And why now do you have to add other parameters that are used out there, right? You want to check, right? You want to check what other institutions say about the same issue. It's called benchmarking, right? You check and you say, okay, what do other institutions who provide information in this regard say? So that when you make your decision, you make a proposal and a decision that is informed, that takes into consideration the totality of what is happening in the South African spectrum. And remember, we are not an island, right? As Parliament, we operate in South Africa. And we know that the economy of South Africa, is not zoomed and narrowed down to parliament. It's a complex kind of thing. So you have to take those issues into consideration. So we use the averaging for that year that has passed and averaging for the year that is upcoming. Because you know that you can have instances where in the year that has gone past, inflation could have been down, and in the year that is forecasted, inflation could be forecasted to go up, or vice versa for that matter. You have a situation where in the past, inflation was high, and in the year that is forecasted, inflation is expected to go down. That's the reason why you need to do that. And really, the issue around inflation increases is to help staff in any organization to manage, the cost of living. So you need to know what is the estimation on the cost of living. So that is the issue. And indeed, we used Stats SA. So if you do the calculations on a month by month, you will know that the figures, the figures that have come through on a month by month, right? And you must average that. Or if you have a figure that says this is an annual figure, because there's a difference there, right? On a month by month, the economy can be said to be performing at, let's say, 0.1, right? The next quarter is performing at 0.7 or 1% and so forth. If you are going to be looking at the performance of the country, you are not going to take the calculation of the month of that month. You have to average it out, right? And say what has been the performance month by month and what is it that you're projecting, right? So it's an acceptable practice that is used out there, because you are not giving an increase for the month. If you were giving an increase for the month, then you would be worried about the month. You are giving an annual increase. The second issue is, I think, more than just banditing numbers. Let's be a little bit more factual around stuff, right? That the numbers that you're referring to, that you say were not paid the performance bonuses, right? When we explained earlier on, I think it was earlier this year, I don't quite remember, last year, when we were explaining the agreement, we indicated that when engaging on a performance review and a performance evaluation, the first step that you get engaged in is that you have the employer and the immediate supervisor engaging on what they think would have happened, right? And would have happened against institutional targets, right? So if I'm evaluating Luzugo, I'm not evaluating Luzugo, just for the sake of it. We have institutional targets. Our targets say these are the things that we are required to perform. These are the targets that have been set. Have you met them? Now, where do you get the information that these targets have been set? They are there in the annual performance plan, right? Stipulated there. So they are not a shifting target, they are there. Where do you get the information that tells you whether you have performed? You also get it in your annual report, or if you like, your quarterly report or your monthly reports. What is it supported by? It's supported by your annual financial statements that are audited, that both your financial and your non-financial information is audited by the Auditor General. Before then, is audited by internal audit, who then present a report to an audit committee, which is independent, constituting of, people who are not from parliament. They are not members, they are not staff members, independent professionals who then say, okay, we agree that this is your level of performance. That then says, this is how I have performed. I must then say, as an individual, my performance, how does that performance fare against that? And you are looking at it against a unit, you are looking at it against a division, you are looking at it against a branch, and you are looking at it against an institution. At an institutional level, you'll be judging the performance of the secretary against what is there in the annual report and against what is there in the annual financial statement. You want to judge the performance of the deputy secretary here, you look at the branch performance, both your financial and your non-financial data. In that way, there is no situation where I will say as the secretary, you know, I am very, very, very good. I'm actually an excellent employee, but the figures say something else, and the annual report says something else. Because if I am that good, it must be supported by what is in the annual report and what is in the annual financial statements. In that way, you're combining two things and two concepts. The issue of individual performance, which is linked to institutional performance, meaning we don't exist by ourselves. We exist in order to fulfill an institutional role in this institution. That's the relationship that is there in the institution. That's why performance management is important. And that's why you then need to assess it against that. And that's why if then any section, unit, division, or even at the institutional level, we were to claim something which is different from what is in the annual report and in the annual financial statement, it will be problematic. And that would then need to be moderated. I would then have to face the executive authority who say, Secretary, look, it's good that you have a good view of yourself and you think you perform very well, but the reality is that you have not performed, and these, are what these reports are saying. So they would then have to moderate that in validating the thing and say, look, your performance is not where it is. It must actually come down because there the evidence says so. That's the process that we have undertaken, right? And that's the process where you are moderating, and the moderating so happens then to take a score of a person down. Then a person says, well, my score has been changed and I have not been paid what is due to me. It would be nice if all of us, I would have the latitude of saying, well, to the executive authorities, look, I've performed very well and I deserve this bonus. Can you give it to me? And they can say nothing about it. And we know that can happen. It's not true, right? They would be not performing their responsibilities in that regard. Then on the second issue of the D band, the D band is management, The D band is management, and we had indicated that management, in spite of the fact that they've worked very hard, because let's not make a mistake, right? To think that the people that performed there, it's only staff, and they're the only ones in the A and C level, basically. And the others did not perform, because they don't perform by themselves. They perform because they are led. They are led by these managers who make them to perform, right? Equally so, if they don't perform, it will be the responsibility of management. That's when you will then say, well, management X and management Y, you didn't perform. But we decided, based on the engagement we had with the union, and agreed management is not going to receive in this sense. And I had to go and do a very painful thing of going to tell my colleagues that, okay, fine, can you this time not get the reward? Not because they did not perform, because of the engagement that happened there, right? And that decision said all management, right? And D band is part of management. Now, that does not say be a union member, don't be a union member. It says you must know exactly where you are. You're not in the bargaining chamber. This is a decision that applies at the bargaining chamber. Non-bargaining chamber, you know, your issue will then be different. Will be handled differently. The question of whether now, you know, staff in the deep end and staff, you know, their constitutional right is violated and so forth. Look, the truth of the matter is I can also be part of the union, right? There's nothing that prevents the secretary from joining the union and being part of the union. The question that we have to ask and that we have to deal with and confront, is that desirable? Is there no conflict of interest there that you can see? Right? If I can do that thing without affecting my responsibilities as accounting officer, that would be perfect. For instance, I'm called on as management to make sure that people who are striking and illegally, right, I record. Do I do it, right? Or is that a conflict between now me betraying the union and so forth, right? And if I then hesitate there, and then there's a problem. The second issue is that decisions around management mean, well, you know that division says it wants X, Y, Z. And at some point in time, you're going to say to somebody, no, look, you can't have this. Or so and so wants this and wants that, right? You have to say you can't do that, right? And that we have to do in a very professional sense. I can now first check, well, is this person a union member or not? I'm called on as management to apply myself accordingly. The third issue is, as management, I have a responsibility to discipline. Part of management is, you know, you plan, you control, you discipline, you report. Am I going to be able to do these things? And part of planning, as you know, is about allocating resources in accordance with the strategy of the institution. Not in accordance with, well, is this person the person that I like or not, and so forth. No, right? And now these are the questions that we have raised. The questions that we must confront. Now, if anybody can do that, including myself, because this constitution is ours, right? It's not a constitution that is a constitution for other people, and it's ours. Myself can be a union member, but should I be a union member? Where are the ethical standards there and the professionalism? Yes. Because if I'm going to be conflicted at some point in time, right, in dealing with these issues, which are very complex there, then we must deal with that. So there's nothing that really, the question that is being asked, and we can look really at various institutions and so forth, because as part of management, as a matter of fact, there's nothing preventing the secretary from choosing people who are in the deep end to serve in the collective bargaining structure. Can they go, being union members, serve there in the collective bargaining structure and exercise the fiduciary responsibility that is given to them by the FMPPLA? That says you must make the right decisions there. These are questions that we are confronting, that we must deal with, right? We must deal with them. We must not shy away from them. We must deal with them. So I think those are the issues, because the managers, as a matter of fact, if we mention another point there, is that the same managers, if you follow the process of managing and communicating, is that the secretary must communicate with the deputy secretary, who must tell the divisional managers, who must tell the section managers, the unit managers, and so forth. And then you have the unit managers who are at the D level, not doing their job, right? Not telling, if let's say that happens. I'm not saying that's what people at that level do. Let's say that happens, right? We are breaking the chain of management that is required, right, around that. And part of the responsibility of management is to go down there and say, well, what are the issues that are coming out there so that management can address them? we are not then necessarily expected to then go there and say, well, you know, we have a problem and we don't know how to solve it, because we are hired as managers to solve problems. So if you can't then manage and solve problems, the truth of the matter is that you should not manage. You should not be in that position. You should be in another position, so that somebody who can manage, manages, right? Yes. So we must deal with these issues, you know? We must deal with these issues. It's like one day, if you were to be confronted with a situation where you have a journalist who becomes a spokesperson for parliament, that would be a problem, eh? In your role as a journalist, you now become a spokesperson for parliament instead of exercising your role and your responsibility. Because your role demands certain things. There's a particular role for the spokesperson, right? Now, these issues are there, we must deal with them. Then, I mean, I think that addresses those issues. I don't know whether Tate Makel and maybe you want to add on this issue of benefits. You know, the issue of benefits, we are saying, because the statement comes through, Mary Ann, that says Parliament is not treating its staff well. You know, you are making a very important observation, as a matter of fact, right? From what you are saying, these things are there and they're being provided, right? Which is the same point we're making. So it can't be true that that Parliament is treating its staff worse than staff in any other area. It's a very interesting observation, which, by the way, I agree with, right? And we are saying over and above that, there are certain things we do, right? You can check, I mean, this thing with the National Treasury, who manages the issues around public service increases and so forth, and what the minister says, which in effect, I suppose, part of the things that I'm saying now are things that the minister will probably tell us that that's one of the things that you need to review as Parliament, of providing increases above inflation, because what they have indicated around those issues is, look, this is where we are as a country now. These are the things that we need to do. We have committed to that. We have implemented that. But over and above that, somebody says, okay, fine, you still owe me 1%. In the space where we are as a country, which is common cause to everybody, nobody needs to be explained that issue. We have lived up to that particular, you know. So I think in this instance, for me, if there are issues that are not clear, or issues where there are different takes, different interpretation, and so forth, what we are saying, and we are saying to colleagues also, you know, in the union, is let's engage around these issues rather than going, you know, make statements in the media. But secondly, assume the statements are made there and so forth. Let's engage on these issues, right? Because there is no other way of dealing with this matter other than engaging. There is definitely no other way of dealing with other than engaging, you know? And in this instance, we have a letter signed by the union accepting that. So the key question is, what then is this other issue that is being raised? Because they accepted it.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Mr. Makel. Is there anything you want to add? No? Okay. Any further comments? Mary Ann, you seem to be the only one. Okay, Mary Ann, please proceed.
I'm afraid the Secretary to Parliament's responses, particularly around the D-band, has raised a number of issues. While I do understand that unit managers are members of the D-band, it's also a well-known fact that a number of, say, content advisors are part of the D-band, and as content advisors to committees, they play a particular role that is not a management role. So already here, some of the arguments put forward are unraveling, because the blanket statement that D-level are managers clearly is not applicable in all cases. Similarly, I'm not quite sure why there is an assumption that if you're part of a union, you can't manage money or conduct your fiduciary responsibilities, because quite frankly, that's your job as the accounting officer. And not all managers have financial and fiduciary responsibilities. So again, there's some kind of collapsing of generally, well-established management principles. And certainly, I would love to get a copy of Parliament's performance management because it's not on the website and it's nowhere publicly to be found. I would love to get a copy of that because the system of moderation and marking down or marking up, look, I come from the private sector. I've always been part of a performance management team. That sort of system doesn't apply. So I would love to have a copy of that performance management. Thank you.
Rahima, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with Nehawu or what's being discussed here. I'm just going to throw it out there. Has Parliament taken steps to open a case against the pensioners for, in terms of the Illegal Gatherings Act or something along those lines? Is there a move to have the pensioners who have been camping outside Parliament, to have them removed?
Thank you very much, Lusuko and Marianne and Rahina. Marianne, content advisors, they manage their committees, isn't it? No, they do. They do, right? Because I must explain how the system works around this issue. But before I do that, I want to explain the issue of delegations to you and the FMPPLA. The FMPPLA enjoins all staff to manage the resources of the institution prudently. All staff. It's the same principle that you'll find in the PFMA, right? Because you're dealing with resources and assets of the institution, right? So when you say somebody has financial responsibility or non-financial responsibility, what in fact you're talking about are the different levels of responsibility. But every one of us have a responsibility to manage the resources of the institution properly. And that is the expectation. That's where even the concept of the balance scorecard comes from. It says there are financial responsibilities that you have in your respective area of responsibility. And they differ, right? Accordingly. That's why if you don't use the resources of the institution responsibly, it doesn't matter what function you perform. Then the lines of accountability going up gets exercised in that regard, right? So when we look at the issue of your content advisors, which I think the colleagues here will also add in this regard, they manage, right, the responsibilities of various portfolios, because they're the ones who will be gathering information from a wide variety of sources. They work with the researchers, they work with the communicators, you know, they work with all sorts of people who have to provide support to a committee. Each committee has particular programs that have to be implemented, actions that have to be taken It has a particular budget in terms of those particular activities that have to be implemented. And then you have all of those people then having responsibilities in their various areas. So it's not quite right to say they don't do that. If you're talking about the level, of course they are not at the level of deputy secretary, divisional manager, and so forth. You are quite right there. And that is not the point that is being made, right, around these issues. The question of the performance management, the policies. Policies of any institution, you want internal policies of the institution, you won't find them in the website. You'll find them in the intranet. Most institutions, that's what you would have, right? Because they are related to how the institution functions and so forth. They are different from policies that govern matters of the public and so forth, where the public then interacts with that and requires those policies for them to do their business, you know, in this regard. And you want to inspect that, and once again, as I say, you can engage, you know, our office here. And you must then, in that regard, also have interaction with our HR executive, who can then explain how these things work, right? Because it's policy and practice. So that we don't only read documents, and then after reading documents, then we conclude. We must then say, how has this institution done this thing, right? And so forth. And you can even then look at what the public service does. Moderation does happen, right? On the statement that the union, if you are part of a union, you can't manage money, I don't know where that comes from, Marianne. It most certainly does not come from me, right? It's a statement that doesn't make sense. I mean, it suggests some kind of prejudice of some sort. I mean, there's nothing that would say inherently if you have been in the union, you can't manage money. It's not correct. In fact, there are many people who have been in the union and have grown up to be you know, managers and leaders in this country, and they manage resources. So it's not a factual statement, and it's not a statement that I would make, and it's not a statement I am making. The point that we're making around this issue is the concept of management, right, says you have particular responsibilities that you must exercise. And those responsibilities, as I have indicated to you, if you can do them without compromising the institution, it would be great. And we'll probably not have problems. But if you find that there are contradictions, you are conflicted in doing your job and showing that you are a committed member of the union, then there's a problem there. I mean, that's really not rocket science, right? The same way as I've said, there's nothing preventing the secretary from being a member of the union. But each and every time the secretary has to deal with matters that relate to the union, and then he has to say to the executive authority, but executive authority, remember that I'm a member of the union. That doesn't make sense, right? So everybody is free to associate with whoever. That's our constitution. Right? It doesn't change. But in dealing with issues of management, you would know about the concept that firstly, you must perform your responsibilities professionally. So professionalism has certain particular dictates. Secondly, you know that in order to manage risks, it's an acceptable principle that you must segregate your duties so that you are then clear. The people who are doing this are not conflicted in this particular area. And that concept does not only apply in this instance, it is also even applies to management. You know that when you are in finance, when you are receiving you know, the goods there in SCM, you're not going to be the person that pays. And that has got nothing to do with inherent qualities that you may or may not have as an individual. But that's how the system works. And that's how the system is designed, so that it makes sure that we're as efficient as possible. You know, so that issue, Marianne, I think it's quite clear. I think what Dr. Gabriel will talk about, the issue of, will add on. Okay, let me add then. That content advisors, right? They have supervisory responsibilities, actually, to be a little bit more precise, right? In this regard, they have supervisory. As I said, they manage those spaces. That's why those posts were created. Remember, the post was not there before. You used to have, I think we call them committee clerks and or committee secretary, right? So it was added at that level to add more, yes, to add more quality at that level. So they have supervisory responsibilities. Then on the issue of the question asked by Rihanna, no, oh, sorry, Rahim. I nearly made you a superstar, eh? But you are a superstar. Of the pensioners. The short answer is Parliament has not opened any cases, and I don't think we're going to open any case whatsoever. As you know, Parliament has been in constant conversation with the pensioners since they arrived. I think it's about 2 weeks ago. We have worked with them, worked with the Department of Labor, Social Development, to try and address the issues, and I think it's a DTI, part of the team, public enterprises, right, to try and find solutions in this regard. The incident today, really, we were quite surprised by it, but we understand. On our part, I think the issue that was just of concern was, the prevention of members coming to the APCs, which that was quickly cleared because the APCs happened as they were supposed to. And we are engaging the pensioners in this regard. You know, the role that Parliament is playing in this regard is one of facilitation, because these matters, they would belong to directly the Department of Labor. We are constantly engaged then with the Department of Labor in order to make sure that these matters are resolved as speedily as possible. Obviously, what is happening distresses all of us.
Thank you, colleagues. Just to acknowledge the Deputy Secretary arrived, Deputy Secretary for Support Services, Ms. Baby Kyawa, towards the end, of course, dealing with a number of issues, including the issue of the pensioners. Can I take it that we have reached the end of our interaction? Like we said, hopefully it's not the first, it's not the last. And thank you very much for your attendance. There are beverages there that are for your provision. Please help yourselves. Thank you very much. The interaction is now ended.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.